Today I'm going to take apart 6 financial independence and early retirement myths in Europe, which came up in the comments to my previous video on FI, which you guys seem to really enjoy. We'll revisit the 4% rule since a few of you mentioned that it's not conservative enough, find out if taxes and social insurance could impact our goal, if you should switch to a distributing ETF once retired, and much more. But let's get you up to speed first in case you're new. Ever since discovering FI almost 7 years ago, my wife and I have been working on this shared goal. To reach a point where we don't have to work anymore if we don't want to, and where our investments are able to sustain our living costs forever. The two of us, plus our lovely 11-month-old daughter, are based in Vienna, Austria, a country that's generally not regarded as having a low cost of living or low taxes and social insurance payments. But due to relatively low expenses, primarily driven by our low rent in a housing co-op and our pretty minimalist lifestyle, we're currently on track to reach our goal of early retirement in a few years. In fact, here's a quick update on where we currently are on our journey before we go over the 6 major concerns you guys had about FI. I just recalculated our monthly expenses because a few things changed since our last video. For instance, our daughter started going to private daycare, which added 200 euros to our monthly costs, which is still incredibly affordable, by the way, especially when I see that some of you guys are paying over 1,000 euros in the Netherlands, for example, which is just crazy in comparison. And my wife got her own gym membership now that she's gaining some of her freedom back and going back to work as a part-time employee, which adds an extra 30 euro per month. As a result, our total expenses as a family of 3 would currently be sitting at 2,000 euros per month if it weren't for 349 euros in child subsidies we receive here in Austria, dropping our total monthly cost of living down to 1,650 euros. These subsidies are not income dependent, by the way, since some of you asked. As for our investments, the two of us received a total of 8,000 euros in tax refunds since our last update, which we invested as well according to our target allocation. With a current market value of 240,700 euros or 75%, ETFs remain the long-term foundation of our early retirement strategy, followed by about 12.5% or 41,000 euros we have in P2P Lending for extra cash flow and diversification, and about the same amount is currently split between the two largest crypto assets, Bitcoin and Ethereum, as a personal high-risk bet of mine. Based on our current monthly expenses of 1,650 euros, which will round up to 1,700 euros to account for small irregular expenses I may have missed throughout the year, our yearly expenses are still sitting at 20,400 euros, but now this number includes the child subsidies we receive in Austria. To get to the amount we would need to have invested to retire early according to the 4% rule, which I discussed in more detail in my previous video right here, we then need to multiply that number by 25 or divide it by 4%, which gets us to 510,000 euros. Since we currently have 322,700 euros invested in total, this means we're 63.3% of the way towards early retirement and well on track to be able to retire before either of us turns 40. I'm 33 and my wife is 30 years old, in case you're wondering. By the way, if you're looking for the best low-cost brokers in Europe for ETFs and you'd like to support me, feel free to use my links in the description below. And while you're there, don't forget to gently tap that like button for more videos like this and to subscribe if you haven't already. So, now that you're all caught up, let's finally get to early retirement criticism number 1. The 4% rule is too optimistic. You should be using a lower withdrawal rate instead to be safe. Actually, the original study the 4% rule was based on is already pessimistic by design and highly unrealistic. Basically, it assumes you're always going to withdraw an inflation-adjusted 4% of your initial retirement amount every year, with no flexibility on your end in case the markets are down a lot at the time, and that you'll have zero income apart from what your investments generate forever. Are you really never going to earn a single extra euro, not even from pension payments after a certain age? And as morbid as this may sound, do you think you'll never inherit anything either? Of course, the opposite could also be the case. I don't know your personal situation. You may need to actually take care of your relatives financially. Still, I wanted to point out how unlikely it is that someone, especially if they retire in their 30s or 40s, never makes any extra money after retiring. Or even that someone would always withdraw exactly an inflation-adjusted 4% of their initial retirement amount every year with zero flexibility. And really, what's the worst case scenario in case you do need to spend more than what you're able to safely withdraw from your investment portfolio? You go work part-time or find another way to earn some extra income? Would that be the end of the world, and would that make pursuing FI stupid to begin with? I don't think so, but that's just me. I get that having a conservative approach makes sense, which is why I often see people calculating with much lower withdrawal rates. Just keep in mind that going from a 4% withdrawal rate down to 3% now means you need to have a 33% larger investment portfolio. A 500,000 euro retirement number using the 4% rule now turns into 667,000 euros if you only calculate with a 3% withdrawal rate. That difference could mean many extra years of work that may not be needed, especially if you end up pursuing a passion in retirement, and that ends up making you some money at some point, which is very likely based on the early retirees I know. One of the OGs of financial independence, Mr. Money Mustache, wrote a great article about this titled "Why You'll Probably Never Run Out of Money," where he talks about the one more year syndrome based on a few people he knows. It's easy to fall into the "you can never be too safe" trap, but he argues that you can indeed be too safe, since that extra perceived safety comes at a high cost, your own limited lifetime. At the end of the day, whichever withdrawal rate you ultimately choose to pursue, you'll never be able to eliminate all risks, since the future will always remain impossible to predict. There's no way around it. Criticism number 2. High inflation will crush your retirement plans. Actually, stocks have been an excellent long-term inflation hedge historically. So as long as you're primarily invested in assets instead of holding everything in cash, I don't see a problem. There's a reason why the yearly withdrawals using the 4% rule are adjusted for inflation already. For example, the FTSE All-World returns after inflation were still 5.88% per year on average since 2003. And since 1979, the MSCI World returned an impressive 7.6% per year after inflation. We've simply been going through 2 years of elevated inflation now, which is something we're not used to anymore. In part due to all the money that was printed out of thin air to cope with COVID restrictions in 2020 to 2021, and due to the higher energy costs in Europe since 2022. But based on how much inflation has come down since then, especially in the US, with Europe lagging a bit behind, I don't believe high inflation will be the norm going forward. Perhaps we'll see 3% per year on average instead of the 2% we were used to, but I don't see it going much higher personally. Either way, assets like well-diversified low-cost ETFs or real estate are a great way to protect your nest egg against inflation in the long run. Criticism number 3. You don't know your future expenses yet, just wait until your kid grows up and you'll see. Your expenses will explode and early retirement will become a distant memory. I get that. After all, I've only been a dad for 11 months so far, so what do I know? But there's no way for me to know today how much our life as a family is going to cost in the future, as too many variables are involved. One thing I do know is that we won't cheap out on providing our girl with anything she needs or that would make her life better and more enjoyable, so our costs will definitely increase. Still, I have to start somewhere, so for now I'm calculating with the expenses we have right now, and I'll adjust our retirement number as these change over time. Number 4. It's better to own distributing ETFs once retired. I understand the thinking behind this. Ideally, you would just live off the dividends from distributing ETFs and never have to sell any shares. However, there are 2 issues with this logic. First, dividends only make up a small part of total returns. For example, the FTSE All-World, our favorite ETF, only has a dividend yield of around 2%, which wouldn't be enough to fully cover a 4% withdrawal rate anyway. Meanwhile, we're calculating with long-term total returns, so capital gains and dividends, of 7% per year on average based on historical data, with plenty of ups and downs along the way. And second, accumulating ETFs, so ETFs that automatically reinvest dividends into more shares of the stocks within the index, provide you with tax benefits in most European countries exactly because dividends are not paid out to your brokerage account in cash but reinvested instead throughout the year, raising the value of your shares by that amount. Now that fees for buying and selling have become so low, often at just €1 or 1.25 euros per trade, using the best low-cost brokers link down below, if you want, you can even easily simulate those 2% of dividends you would have received from the distributing version by just selling that percentage of shares of the accumulating version every year to the same effect return-wise. But you'll still be enjoying the tax savings an accumulating ETFs provides you with in most countries, since your money is able to work and compound for longer and you're the one that decides when you want to turn some of your ETF investments back into cash to cover expenses. Speaking of taxes, this brings me to concern number 5, which seems to be a big one: taxes. Angelo, what about taxes and social insurance? I mean, you'll need to pay plenty of taxes on profits you withdraw from your investments. Are you factoring those in? Of course, taxes are a factor, but they may end up being a lot lower than you would assume once retired, depending on your local tax laws. Here's how it is in Austria, where we normally have a pretty high 27.5% tax on capital gains and dividends. Once you live off your investment income and don't receive any or much lower income from regular work, you can opt in to having your capital gains taxed at your personal income rate via something called Regelbesteuerungsoption in your yearly tax returns. So if you're in an income tax bracket that's below 30%, you could save quite a bit of taxes this way. For example, my wife and I could each realize 11,693 euros in capital gains based on current tax brackets, So a total of 23,386 euros per year tax-free if you were to retire right now and not have any other income anymore. So our current expenses could already be covered tax-free. Or we could realize 19,134 euros each in profits, a total of 38,268 euros per year, paying an average of only 7.78% in taxes, compared to the 27.5% we would have to pay otherwise. And remember, all of this is only counting actual capital gains, so the percentage of your invested funds that's in profit once you withdraw. Of course, what I just talked about only relates to Austria where we live, but perhaps your country's tax laws offer something similar. As for social and health insurance, luckily it's not calculated based off your investment income, only from your salary or other work income. Once retired, an easy solution would be for me to stay signed up to social insurance via self-employment, where I would then only need to pay the minimum amount, 145 euros per month, as long as I stay below 6,000 euros in yearly profits generated from work. Remember, investment income or realized capital gains are not counted here. To make things even better, I would only need to pay an additional 17 euros per month for my wife to also be covered via my insurance as long as she's not working. And lastly, our daughter would be covered as well, in fact for free until she turns 18. This means the three of us would only have to pay a total of 162 euros per month for health insurance in Austria. I'd argue that's a pretty good deal, even if you almost never have to go see the doctor. The sixth and last myth I want to talk about is that by pursuing FI, you must be restricting yourself and that you're giving up things that make life worth living. What if you die tomorrow? If that happens, you'll definitely regret saving up your money instead of spending it, right? In the last video, a handful of people criticized how little we spend as a family. We shouldn't be so frugal with our money. Well, I can honestly tell you that at least to us, it feels like we're living a rich, luxurious lifestyle filled with everything that's important to us. It just so happens that apart from our inexpensive apartment, which definitely gives us a major edge cost-wise, the majority of free time activities we enjoy most, like hiking, either cost no money or are very affordable, like our gym memberships. Combine that with the fact that we enjoy cooking and eating at home more than ordering takeout or eating at restaurants, something we still do once a week though, and that lately we've been mostly staying with friends or family during our trips to Croatia, Italy and Hungary. Our expenses just happen to be on the lower end right now. Of course, that could change if our priorities change, but we certainly never feel like we're restricting ourselves from doing something we would like to do for monetary reasons. Both my wife and I feel the same on this. If we were to die tomorrow, we would have zero regrets about how we lived our life so far. What we value the most is time and freedom. In fact, in the context of our pursuit of FI over the past 7 years, I'd turn around the popular phrase time is money into money is time. Time to do what you value the most and with the people that matter the most to you in life, because of the freedom you created for yourself by simply putting aside and investing part of your income over time. If you feel like you're restricting yourself from spending money on things that you really enjoy, then you're doing something wrong in my opinion. But now I want to hear from you guys. Do you agree or disagree with my response to these 6 points? Leave a comment below. Also, don't forget to gently tap the like button if you enjoyed the video and to subscribe if you haven't yet. If you'd like to support me, feel free to use my links in the description below to the best low-cost brokers in Europe for ETFs. And please keep in mind that none of what I mentioned today was of course meant as investment advice. I'm simply openly sharing what we're doing on our journey towards financial independence in Europe. Thank you guys so much for watching, have a wonderful day and until next time.